Brandon Thurston from Wrestlenomics is up next, and we're going to follow Brandon with John Pollock from Post Wrestling.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone.
But we can't ignore the math, okay? We can't ignore the data.
Go on Google Trends, type in your name, then type in mine. You're a straight line. I'm a pyramid.
I like the very direct question on that.
Television ratings, downward spiral. Buy rates, plummeting.
The time is now to turn the math around.
And here we are, back in your ears, in front of your eyes. I am John Pollock, joined as always by Brandon Thurston. We were off for a week. It was our bye week, and here we are, returning full throttle as we are heading into All In weekend, which is followed by Bash in Berlin weekend, which is followed by All Out weekend. Yes. They just never stop. How are you, Brandon?
I'm good. I'm glad I didn't decide to actually travel. There was a point where I was very seriously considering going to all three of those shows and flying from London to Chicago.
Yeah, you had outlined this European trip that would end in Chicago for All Out. It was a very ambitious thought process, and you probably came to your senses. That would have been a lot of airtime, and I think this would have really interrupted your ability to follow along the DNC coverage all week that's going on in Chicago this week. Have you been keeping abreast of these speeches, these go home promos that we've been seeing with?
They really are promos.
That's what they are.
It's like a promo convention, basically, and very much the same for the RNC a month ago or whenever it was. And you never know when you're going to get a clip on the internet or Instagram from one Hulk Hogan and his, Real American Beer or whatever he was doing.
That's going to be coming up, everybody, because Hulk Hogan, once again, caught on camera, which, again, the lesson to be learned is not spewing out hateful commentary, but rather make sure you're not being filmed. That's the lesson to learn, right? You're always being filmed.
If you're Hulk Hogan, after what he's been through, he's got to assume he's always being filmed.
Yes, we will talk a bit about that with Hulk Hogan later to come. Also on today's show, Todd Martin from The Fix on the Pro Wrestling Torch Network. He is going to be returning to the show. It's always great to talk with Todd, not only a man of many, many talents, but also a legal scholar himself. And we can ask all of our legal questions for Todd Martin. We bank them up for all these weeks and months, and then we just get them out of our system. And Todd,
and we expect him to answer them clearly and with certainty.
That's it. All of our guests are under oath when they join us as well. That's one of the stipulations we demand when people come on the show. I'm always excited to chat with Todd Martin, and I guess we can start off with AEW All In. We'll go into more of it with Todd and the lead up and such. But just overall, Brandon, what do you think this coming weekend kind of represents for AEW? It's their return to Wembley Stadium, and it seems as though in many ways, it's the second biggest attendance in the company's history, and it is on the precipice of all these announcements that are constantly being teased and hinted at by Tony Khan, right down to interpretations of his wardrobe choices on select interviews. But it's a very big weekend.
He did an interview that was published today, where he is wearing. Now we've seen him do these interviews in the Warner Brothers Discovery baseball cap, and you can decipher and judge for yourself what that means. But now he has done an interview with a purple Max, the streaming service baseball cap, which I speculate away on what that might mean about the specifics of AEW's TV deal.
Yeah, it's a very Dana White move, where he would often attend the weigh-ins, and he would have a shirt on that you would have to decipher what he was supporting. And
this is what happens when he doesn't answer questions with great clarity, and he jumps around to just going on and promoting the show. We have no choice but to analyze his wardrobe for the real answers.
That's you can't hide from the wardrobe decisions and what they mean on a grander scale. But this is, I think, such an interesting time for AEW that we're sort of it's just wait and see mode about the announcement of this pending television deal. And how do you view this second attempt running Wembley Stadium now that we are just a few days out from a show that was announced a year in advance?
I saw Garrett Kidney's comment on Twitter the other day that, if you can put it in this context, that if you had thought about a company that's not WWE, say, if you're thinking we're having a conversation 6 years ago, there's going to be a company that's not WWE that's going to draw probably over 50,000 tickets distributed, right? It's at 49 right now.
Yeah.
And that would be a mind-blowing notion, and people would laugh at you for even suggesting that, but that's going to happen. You can look at it in that sense. But it's another comparison point. Here, we can look at it in a more negative sense. It's another comparison point that shows the decline year over year in AEW's various consumer-driven metrics, in this case, ticket sales for its biggest show of the year, which is consistent with declines in TV ratings, even when we're adjusting for cord cutting, because we busted out, and the Torch has busted out lately the coverage ratings and compared those, and it's down for Dynamite year over year. And it's down for Dynamite's attendance year over year. And we've got the Dynamite coming up after this All In show in Champaign, Illinois, which I believe is Tony Khan's hometown, right? About 2 hours outside of Chicago. Last I checked, it's at about 1,000 tickets distributed, which is a extraordinarily low attendance even for Dynamite. And that's the story of this company, is that it's doing well enough. TV ratings are doing well enough, probably, for there to be a new TV deal that's really beneficial to the company and maybe makes it profitable and sustainable. But it's also not as popular as it was a year ago, and certainly 2 years ago.
If we get this announcement, like let's say Tony comes out in a brand new
TV deal announcement, which I think is very possible on the day of All In, that there might be a TV deal announcement. And I think, John Pollock, you had said to yourself, what is the day where we have to start pulling the alarm? And you said Labor Day, and we're coming up pretty close on Labor Day.
I mean, maybe we'll get a full 3-piece WBD suit that Tony Khan comes out in to announce this deal. But let's say the deal is announced. It's a very healthy increase. And at what point are we looking at, like, how important do live attendances become for this company? You're always gauging popularity metrics and what comes with those. How important is that to the company if they are in the clear with this deal? There is a certain cushion that comes with a television deal. How concerned are you if you are Tony Khan and looking at your U.S. live attendance and where this is clearly trended downward, at least domestically?
I mean, the first priority is to make this a sustainable company that can financially support itself. So, like, literally, on the surface, attendance is not important at all. This is not a wrestling business, at least among the very tip-top companies. This is not a wrestling business that's largely driven by live event revenue. This is a business that's largely driven by media revenue, the selling of your TV show rights and streaming rights or whatever else, and maybe site fees and things like that. This is not the old wrestling business anymore, at least at the very top. But it does tell you, it's kind of a health indicator, though, isn't it? That, look, now, to some extent, though, you do need an arena that looks like a nice NBA-sized arena. That really helps with your production values, I would say, and it helps with your media value, as opposed to doing a show in a studio. Maybe if you're justifying why NXT didn't get an even bigger deal than it got, looking at its ratings, which are getting more and more comparable to Dynamite, is one of the things that you could point to, is that, well, NXT is in essentially a studio. It's in the Performance Center. It's not in a major arena with thousands of people there. So that adds something to the production value. And if you're struggling to fill seats, or if you're maybe doing more of these collision residencies, then maybe the media value becomes a little less. But yeah, it just tells you something about the popularity of the product. But as long as you've got a Dynamite that can rank number one sometimes among cable programs in 1849, you're probably going to continue to drive a strong media rights fee.
Now, there was an update just the other day from Sean Ross Sapp at Fightful Select, who had noted that he had spoken with a number of sources within AEW and WBD about the possibility of an impending announcement. WBD sources confirmed there was still some red tape to get through, but that another offer for a long-term television deal was made recently to AEW from the company that they're very confident in. Fightful reported earlier this summer that Tony Khan had been scheduled to meet with David Zaslav in Paris. Khan confirmed as much, and Fightful has heard that both sides considered that meeting productive. One WBD source called the offer, quote, extensive, but didn't elaborate on what that meant outside of saying the terms of the deal were literally extensive, but that the offer is in AEW's hands and that they're reviewing it. And what this exactly entails, it's unknown, but said that the deal is that he's stating that the offer was at least double the amount of their previous deal, which becomes tricky. And Sean outlines this in the report that you should check out at Fightful Select, but double what the original deal was, double, as Brandon, you have asked many times about the changes in the deal once Collision was tacked on. What is the principle that this double figure is being based off of? So
yes, excellent reporting by Sean of Fightful. I have to ask though, what does literally extensive mean?
Well, it could be figuratively extensive, where it's
What does a literal extensiveness mean? And well, so
in fairness,
anyway,
this is what the source called it. The WBD
it is in quotes. It is in quotes.
Okay.
Anyway, so I think the current annual payments from WBD to AEW for their U.S. rights is about $75 million per year. This is now since they've included Collision as part of this deal. Collision has caused them to tape an extra day of TV every week. That's enormously expensive, especially if you're not doing a residence like they just did. So I think it's about $75 million. How much do they need to be profitable? I don't know. Double might do it, and you can always cut costs. And if you really wanted to make it work and make it profitable, $200 million a year would probably do it. So the thing that the Fightful report is getting at there is when we're talking about doubling, and I think I've discussed this with Sean recently even, that if we're talking about doubling, what are we doubling? Are we doubling the value of the current content, which only consists of what we know to be on TV right now, Dynamite, Rampage, Collision. Yeah, there's some Battle of the Belts every quarter. There's maybe a reality show. These are small pieces. Or are we talking about a pay-per-view business, or cannibalizing the pay-per-view business as we know it today, $50 per pay-per-view, into some kind of Peacock like WWE? It's just part of a monthly streaming package. Then we're talking about monetizing something that is not currently monetized in the same way. And we're cannibalizing a pay-per-view business, which is probably something like $20 million per year for AEW in terms of net revenue. So I guess you could conceive of it that way if you wanted to give sort of calculate a true factor. You could say, okay, there's 75 million on the domestic, let's call them live rights. I know they're not always live. And then let's say there's another 20 on pay-per-view. You could say, okay, that's about $95 million. And you could, if the new deal consists of pay-per-view rights as well, takes that pay-per-view content and uses it somehow, you could think of it that way, I guess. And that does get near 100, and doubling that is 200 million. We'll see. Yeah, I would say maybe 150 is the bare minimum of success, something like that.
We're going to go to a super chat early here from Pete in Texas. Thank you very much for the super chat, Pete. If WBD gets a larger piece of AEW, how does that and the pay-per-views on Max affect the overall money deal? What does it all mean? Will we ever really know? That's an existential question. Will we ever really know?
There's enough lawsuits. Lawsuits are always helpful.
Are you guys going to do some kind of a breakdown? I mean, with whatever is reported, typically with a lot of these big television rights deals, it's not going to be the league, or in this case, the wrestling promotion, that's going to outright state the amount. But those figures, especially when they are complementary to your product, always find a way of being released out there.
I would be pretty confident that it will get out there. What happens with any media rights deal that's of any value, it's been reported somewhere or another. And even this current deal was reported by the Observer when it was made in January 2020 that it was, $175 million over 4 years, which comes out to about $44 million per year. That was Dynamite and Rampage only. So I can't think of a deal. I would assume
that was one. Sorry, that was a figure too that when Tony Khan was asked about, stated on the record was like an accurate figure
Yes.
when we were talking about that.
He has
It's not as
tweeted
though-
it even. He has
That's
he
right.
replied to like somebody trolling at him. I make $175 million over 4 years or something like that. So he has confirmed it on the record. I guess I would assume that if there is no reporting of this number, if it hasn't been told to anybody on background, and then an outlet has reported it, that it's not a very big money deal. And we're already like the value of the deal currently, I think, passes a threshold where like that's a big enough money deal that it should be reported. Or that's my gut anyway.
Also, since we were off last week, one thing we wanted to bring to the discussion here is All In 2025, which they have got ahead of themselves, announcing last week that AEW All In Texas is going to be scheduled for Globe Life Field on Saturday, July the 12th. So they will be bumping up All In to early July and getting it away from Labor Day, as it has been the last 2 years. And in the announcement, it stated that this event, which is a partnership between All Elite Wrestling, Rev Entertainment, and the Arlington Sports Commission and City of Arlington, will bring one of the most highly anticipated wrestling events of the year to the home of the Texas Rangers. And that is your announcement for next year. A press conference was held, and in listening to Tony Khan's specific wording, which we are very careful to do here on this show, stated they will be returning to London in 2026. So does that mean Wembley? Does that mean they will just be back in London? I guess to be determined. I think most took it as Wembley Stadium will be a venue that they will go back to in 2026, but we shall see.
He also said they would not be doing a stadium show in Texas in the immediate future.
No, that's correct. Yes, not in the immediate future. I guess
Right.
We can break down the word immediate, but immediate for these purposes are 11 months from now. July
I took that to mean they're going to do All In London in 2026. Did you read it differently?
No, I think that sounded like the only question I had listening to it, because I think a lot of people interpreted it as him stating we'll be back at Wembley. Didn't specifically state Wembley, but London. Yes, I would assume that's where he's planning to take All In next year. Although he also mentioned going to London next year as well for some other event as well, and maybe we could see whether it be the Craven Cottage show or some other location in London that perhaps they have their eyes on.
Yeah, I would think, this is what I said on Sunday, I would think that there's an opportunity for them to do these. I don't know if every location around the world needs a stadium show, but they could do some big priced, with higher ticket prices. They could basically do a pay-per-view maybe a couple times a year in different international locations, because they're certainly not going to do something like WWE does, but does less than ever, is tour through Europe or something like that, or tour through Australia. I could see an occasional pay-per-view to different regions around the world, especially if they could end up getting site fees, if that's something that's going to happen, which has been hinted at in the Australian press recently.
So in the press release, it mentions this Rev Entertainment, the Arlington Sports Commission, and the City of Arlington. I'm sure entities that are going to be on Brandon's hit list in the near future, if not already.
Already.
But we also had good old Jim Ross, the mayor of the city, that was at the press conference and at the show Collision on Saturday night, the last night of their stopover at the Esports Stadium. They're tied in very, very much to the city of Arlington, and you would obviously, reading this press release, you would take that to mean that there are incentives for AEW or some kind of discounting at the very least for AEW to be here and bring a big stadium show.
And they got a discount for their residents at the Esports Arena in Arlington. So that seems like the beginning of some sort of relationship that may have led to some sort of deal or incentive from Arlington to run this show at the stadium. And something that you can see in public if you just go to the governor's website, which of course we all have, and especially since we've been doing so much reporting on records requests in Texas and things like that. That there's
you might need a residency in Texas.
Yeah, I've heard there's a great discount on taxes in general in Texas, but there's an event reimbursement program basically, which has been used by WWE for WrestleMania in 2016 and WrestleMania in 2022. where they submit some paperwork to say this is how much we estimate the local economy is going to benefit, and then you get the state government and the local government to pitch in some money to help offset the costs of running that event. So then you can, in WWE's case, run a very low expense WrestleMania, which is very profitable for them. So it might have been something similar here for AEW, though probably at a lower scale because it's not WrestleMania. But they're certainly hoping to draw tens of thousands of people to that event.
So there you go. All In 2025, again, July the 12th in Globe Life Field, the home of the Texas Rangers. Now, Tony Khan is doing the media rounds this week leading into All In, and he did an interview today with Barstool Sports on their Wrestling podcast. And here is Tony Khan being asked a question about Dr. Britt Baker and her recent suspension, which was worked into a storyline. And here is the question and response from Tony Khan.
It's no secret. It's on the internet that Britt Baker had an issue and was suspended. Has she come through that? Is everything good with that?
I mean, Britt Baker's been on the show just this week. So
I'm just telling you what the internet told me. I didn't say it. The internet told me she was suspended for 2 weeks. That's what they told me.
I think Britt Baker's fantastic, and it's been so great having Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, back in AEW, and she's chasing the CEO.
You get the idea.
That was Tony Khan. We didn't need to hear the rest of the answer there. That pivot gave me whiplash. I listened to this clip, and a lot of times I will immediately just send something to Brandon. I'm like, am I being crazy here? I thought this answer came off so poorly that Tony Khan is being asked a question about like a pretty well-known story at this point. This is not like the biggest scandal in the world that there was a suspension and Britt Baker was back on television last week, as we all saw. But for Tony Khan, who is representing this company and in these positions, to not even be able to acknowledge this, I just thought it just came off as like we're running from just a factual story that your audience knows. I think it just is like talking above your audience as though they're foolish or that they're more ahead of this than you are. And I contrast that to, as we throw out like a Bryan Danielson, who comes to mind because he's also doing media a lot this week and is part of the disciplinary committee. And I just think you get a more thoughtful response when you're actually speaking to your audience that you can actually contextualize and maybe add some perspective of things that go on in your company. And I think you can do that without insulting your talent or making yourself come off bad. Because I just thought that answer was just such a like whimsical, like we're not even going to meet you at the base level that this even happened.
I can only imagine that he thinks it's effective to answer the question that he wishes he was being answered, the Nick Khan school of PR, and to talk about what he would really prefer to talk about, understandably, the match that Britt Baker is involved in that he's promoting. But I think it undermines his credibility to so blatantly dodge a question about a story that we have no reason to doubt. If it's not a true story, then deny it. But I mean, I think you could read it as a denial. It almost sounds like he is denying it, which it's not. There's no reason to doubt that's not a real thing that happened, that Britt Baker was suspended because of some incident involving MJF. So we've been through a couple years of this, and it's not really getting better, and it's not to AEW's benefit, unfortunately. I'm really glad, as I always have to say, I'm really glad that Tony does these interviews and is so accessible to media, but I don't think it's a good service to AEW for him to come across this way, to come across as evasive as I suspect he's not aware that he's coming across.
And I'll be fair, like there are definitely instances when Paul Levesque, what comes to mind with me is a question you.
What about WWE? Come on.
Well, I got to cover my bases here because my mentions are just flood. Hey, it's what about this? What about this? You didn't cover every specific example. Well, when it comes to Brock Lesnar, I mean, Paul Levesque has also been very evasive when it comes to Brock, even though you can see with your own eyes the removal of his promotion from the 2K.
He's doing Brock stuff. He's in
just
Canada.
At home doing Brock stuff. Yeah,
he's hunting.
What does that mean? I don't know, but I mean, it does go to that as well. We asked for transparency, but I thought in this case, it's just like, this is not the biggest controversy in the world to just simply acknowledge what you basically have on television, and that I wouldn't even find it far-flung for them to work it into like a Mercedes Moné promo to bring it up. Like, that would not be out of the purview of AEW and when they throw in comments for promos to add realism to them.
And I guess what put it in this context too is that with all of the Punk drama, I mean, clearly discipline issues and conflicts between talent has been a problem for this company. And at least some of that, and I suspect a large part of that, just comes down to leadership. And maybe it's just not an area that Tony is very confident in managing. I remember strongly, it's a year or two ago at this point, asking him what he has learned over time at that point about how to manage talent. And he had a really long answer that didn't really address it. And he went into tangents about the Jaguars and stuff. And I suspect that that's just an area that he still needs to improve on, and AEW still needs to improve on. And maybe that response is some evidence in that direction that it's not an area that he has a lot of confidence in, and that AEW is super proficient in yet.
Brandon, have you ever gone to the Thirsty Cowboy in Ohio?
No, I have not, despite its first syllable.
Well, on Monday night, had you not been home to watch Raw and you were in the vicinity, wherever this is in the state of Ohio, you might have been able to see a special Hulk Hogan appearance where he was promoting his new, Hulk Hogan All-American beer of some sort, as he's on
Real American beer.
Forgive me. And well, the cameras were rolling, and let's hear Hulk Hogan just, hey, Hulk, can you just go up? Just give us like 30 seconds. Just plug the beer. Real simple.
You want me to throw more beers out? You want me to body slam somebody? You want me to body slam Kamala Harris? I said, do you want me to body slam Kamala Harris? You want me to drop the leg on Kamala? Is Kamala a chameleon? Is she Indian? Okay, I like it. How? I'm gonna get heat for that one, brother. That was not me. That was the beers talking.
That was the beers talking. Yes, over top of Brian Adams, not Crush, with Summer of '69.
We were only listening to audio, and even for people watching a video, we're just looking at a still. So it's probably important to describe what was happening there, because what did he do? I've seen the video, but he put his hand up. It was like in a Native American Indian gesture.
I would imagine, yes. Yeah, he puts his hand up as though he is replicating a Native American. And I guess, you have to give him some credit here because, if you've been following coverage of late, you would think that just mispronouncing Kamala would draw him. But luckily, he put his foot in his mouth even worse, that was just totally forgotten about as he makes this joke at the end. I guess for people, Hulk Hogan has also reached a certain level where it's like, well, this isn't even the worst thing he said on camera, and therefore this is kind of the Hulk Hogan brand at this point. But let's, this is somebody that has been, since the entire racist rant was uncovered in 2015, has been, I think, very careful about his image and trying not to say the wrong things, and then just dove knee deep into politics a month ago. He suddenly is a massive,
might as well.
Yeah, just went head first in, and this is a guy that just appeared for WWE over the weekend at the Fanatics Fest. But I think for a lot of people, this is almost like it is almost expected of Hulk Hogan at this certain time.
There's a lot going on there in that clip where he's mispronouncing Kamala Harris's name, but but you can not excusing him, but you can imagine how Hulk Hogan's brain might work given who his opponents were in the 80s. And he's much more familiar with Kamala, the wrestler who the reputation is that he did great house show business with him, right? And he's doing a promo, and he's doing Austin's what gimmick throughout it, which is
also before the clip that you played, he actually explains how the what works with the audience.
Thank you.
Informing them you say what afterwards, because I can't imagine a bunch of 20-year-olds in a bar are maybe up on the what chant of 2 decades ago that still lives on in this day and age.
Yes.
But I mean, when you look at Hulk Hogan, like it is an interesting relationship WWE has with Hulk Hogan that I think understand the legacy brand of Hulk Hogan, but also somebody that I think they are perfectly happy to have an arm's distance relationship with. Like, here is somebody that was all over the coverage of the RNC last month. And I mean, WWE is not going to touch any of that for any kind of a crossover or piggybacking off of any of that. And I think Hulk Hogan is someone that, they prefer to have in-house as somebody that they can still send to the, this Fanatics Fest autograph sessions. But I think there's also a limit of how much they want to be attached to Hulk Hogan. Or am I reading too much into this?
Maybe. I don't know. Are there any analogs? There aren't that many comparison points to Hogan. I guess Austin, Rock, although they're younger. I think there are a lot of people that, there are like audible mixed reactions for Hogan at this point, I guess. Is it all due to the racist rants? I think it's largely due to the racist rants. And I think WB is eager to be as apolitical as possible and to not do anything that's going to alienate a large portion of their fan base, as opposed to UFC, which is really leaned in. I think that there's damage on Hogan, and that they probably would be more engaged with him if he was not so associated with a racist rant.
Joining us now to make sense of the world's problems, you can hear him every week with Wade Keller on The Fix over on the VIP portion of pwtorch.com. Friend of the show, friend of yours and mine. He is Todd Martin, who is with us. Hello, Todd. Have you ever been to the Thirsty Cowboy Bar in Ohio?
No, I had never even heard of it. Seems like an exciting place. But yeah, another rough night for Hogan. I was down in Tampa for the Rumble, and my buddy who I went with wanted to go to Hulk Hogan's hangout over on the west side, and I did not want to go, so I heartily declined.
And I have to mention too, I was troubled even more so when I first saw this clip, as I raised to John, who refuted this observation. But it looks like the guy who's filming this could be Rob Feinstein, who is also spotted in Ohio recently. So this would all add up. But multiple sources have assured me that is not RF.
Speaking of guys with sordid histories, man, what a connection.
Well, there you go. Hulk Hogan in fine form this past Monday night. If you care to check out any of his Real American beer, which I don't think they'll be selling up here in Canada. But we do have All In coming up this Sunday. And Todd, I asked Brandon this off the top, but I'm kind of curious how you're viewing this show for AEW, and being that they're at this very interesting tipping point with the pending announcements that are coming. It's a return to Wembley Stadium, and certainly there are momentum issues for the company, but there is also this gigantic show that they have to build towards on Sunday. How are you viewing Sunday's show, just in terms of the historical value that it represents for AEW?
Yeah, I don't know that it has a lot of historical value, in the sense that the first one, I think, is going to sort of loom larger than this one in people's memories. I think it'll be a strong show in the ring, as AEW show, pay-per-views almost always are. As far as the build and the interest in it, I mean, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I feel like they've done a good job on television making the biggest matches feel important. I think they've done a good job with Danielson and Swerve, and the way that they've been building it up, I sense that there's going to be a pretty nice crescendo tonight, in the sense that they've spent weeks now with different people essentially arguing that Danielson needs to get more motivated, he needs to get more fired up, he needs to get more into this thing. And I think this is going to be the show where Danielson finally gives a big rah-rah speech where he talks about how important the match is to him after building it up over a long period of time. So I think they've done a good job with that. I think they've done a good job with the Tony Storm Ryan May match. I think they've done a good job with Mercedes and Britt Baker. I'm not as much of a fan of the Ospreay MJF build, but your mileage may vary on that one. So I feel like they built up a number of the matches quite well. I think that the matches have been built up better this year than last year, where a lot of the hook was just first show at Wembley. But on the flip side, I think a big component of any show, doing well overall, or the promotion doing well overall, is the feeling of excitement on the television. And, that's been a part of, WrestleMania every year, and why it's become such a large show in the context of WWE is not only is the show itself big, but the weeks leading up to it are very big as well. There's of course Royal Rumble, which has become the number 2 show, but the weekly television, there's a lot more excitement during that stage of the year. The shows tend to sell, more tickets. That isn't as much of an issue now because tickets are selling pretty well throughout the year. But you've got more interest in that. You've got excitement for the appearances on the television show. The shows just feel exciting and hot, and that is definitely not the feel with AEW television shows right now. I mean, I've been watching Collision and Rampage and Dynamite over the last few weeks, and it feels like 80% of the matches, you know exactly what's going to happen. Half of the other matches, you don't know what's going to happen, and you're expecting a bad finish, you get a bad finish. And I just don't sense that there's a lot of fun or exciting vibes in the weekly television. It's hard to be that, dialed in to the pay-per-view when the weekly television feels flat, even if the matches feel like they're going to be important.
In terms of, looking at a year out that they have had to promote this show. I mean, they made the decision last year at All In to make the return date announcement. At that time period, Todd, were you expecting that there would be an inevitable drop-off? I don't think anyone's looking at 50,000 as any kind of disappointment, but just looking at where AEW was a year ago coming out of that Wembley show, and we can even take away so much of the Punk discussion that followed that show, but in terms of a year out, returning to Wembley, did you see that as a risky strategy on AEW's part, or something that here is a very hungry part of the world for an AEW product that is coming off this incredible event that they staged a year ago in terms of reception and tickets sold?
It was certainly a risky strategy to some degree, in that, you asked whether it's inevitable, and yeah, it was inevitable it was going to go down, because last year they did not sell it out. And, the idea that you're going to be able to sell more tickets the second year than you would the first year for an event where so much of the hook is we're going to run this big stadium for the first time. That was, practically impossible that they were going to draw more, more live tickets sold the second year than the first. With that said, the question was, how much would they drop off? And it was a risk if they dropped off to a certain degree that it would reflect badly on the company. But it was also an opportunity to make a lot of money off of a big gate that they would not get otherwise if they did not try running at a stadium of a comparable size. So I viewed it as a risk, but I viewed it as a calculated risk, and on balance a good idea. And I think it is turned out that way. I think that it was a good idea to run another event. They've got what I think will be a show that will still feel very big. Will draw them a big gate. I don't think it'll be a drop off such that it reflects negatively on the company. Now, unfortunately, there's been drops in other measures of their business that I think reflects more negatively on the company in the past year that don't relate to just the specific attendance of those two shows. But when you just look at the the attendance this year at Wembley versus the attendance last year at Wembley, I think it's perfectly respectable, and I don't think anyone other than people that are specifically looking to go after them would think too negatively of the attendance this year.
Yeah, and we've seen Dynamite attendance is down, I want to say roughly 20% as I try to pull it up. And the ratings for Dynamite are down. Rampage is kind of leveling off. And of course, Collision is way down from before. I listen every week, Todd, but maybe some people listening haven't. Well, what are the reasons, do you think, for why AEW's popularity is not as strong as it was a year ago or 2 years ago?
Well, there's some ongoing problems, and I think a lot of it is just chickens coming home to roost from mistakes made in the past. I mean, I think the key period where AEW lost its footing was in the second half of last year, when they made MJF sort of this goofy comedy champion. They're doing these comedy sketches each week on television with him and Adam Cole. And the show became more and more WWE-like in its presentation. And that turned off, I think, a significant portion of the audience that went to AEW hoping that it would be an alternative to WWE. And, it still felt like an alternative to WWE for much of the time that it was there. WWE got hotter, and that's been used as an excuse in a lot of circles for why things dropped off. But AEW remained doing quite well for an extended period of time after the point that WWE got hot. It was the period last year when the product, and it wasn't just Adam Cole and MJF, you started seeing more in the way of WWE style gimmicks, more comedy sketches on television, more things that did not feel like a distinct product from what WWE was doing, along with the fact that around the same time you added Collision, you added more television each week, which wasn't typically that exciting, and that made the excitement of Dynamite each week feel a little bit diminished as well. And so you had a number of factors there, and you started to see the decline in live attendance. And so many times over the years with pro wrestling companies, you see a decline in live attendance, and then that's followed up later by a decline in television ratings. And that's exactly what we saw here. And it sort of caught up with them, and now they're at a lower point. With that said, there's a number of issues that are ongoing that don't relate to last year's, more comedy oriented top of the card, because at least they removed that from the top of the card. Swerve, Samoa Joe, they haven't been doing comedy sketches to build up their matches. That part is gone. They still have, though, an increasing number of WWE style characters. They've brought in the maximum male models. Granted, you can't blame that in a significant portion given they've only been around for a couple weeks, but they're part of a larger trend. Tony Storm, very popular character, similar deal. It's a very WWE like character presentation. The Acclaimed, a very WWE like presentation. There's all over the television show, they feel like they have less of a distinct identity, which frankly they never did a great job of doing, is describing what they are distinct from WWE. And you can compete against WWE by just producing a better overall product, even if it isn't that distinct, when WWE isn't doing that well. When WWE is doing well, you need to have some sort of distinct calling card, and they don't. I think they've fallen too much into the trap of having too many matches where you know exactly what's going to happen. It's made the shows feel less exciting on a week-to-week basis and less important. And then another big one as well is that when they started out, they only had a few titles, and they've just added more and more and more and more titles. And not only have they added more titles, but a lot of the titles are held by top people. Okada's got his championship, and he's just sort of content, as a major figure of wrestling for his title. You've got MJF and Ospreay contending for another title that is presented as a top title. Those are top guys. And when you have all of these different titles and everyone is holding around a trinket when they wander around on television, and there isn't as much of a sense that there's a differentiation between, and the women's division too, like they've got two top women's titles, and it's hard to discern which one really symbolizes you're the best. And when you've got all of these titles where they all feel about the same level, and there isn't this sense of everyone's competing to try to prove they're the best because what the big goal is, that's, to me, a big key of most wrestling companies, is having the ultimate goal that everyone's working towards. And they've lost that as well. And so that's something that I think that they would benefit from refocusing on with fewer titles, and, not having the titles have distinct identities. In other words, a secondary title is a secondary title rather than just an alternate world title for someone that isn't wrestling for the thing that's called the world title right now.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add to that is that there's the absence of CM Punk, who was by far their biggest star and draw. And I would characterize, to try to put it kind of succinctly for people in a counterintuitive way, is that AEW basically lost their top babyface. And around the same time, they lost their top heel, who was Vince McMahon, who really offered them an opportunity to contrast themselves against this Vince McMahon product. And once Vince McMahon started to be more removed from the WWE product, and in a lot of people's view became better, I think it's caused an identity crisis for AEW, in that it doesn't know what to it defined itself in contrast to this product that people were dissatisfied with. And now that people are less dissatisfied with it, AEW's purpose in life is less clear. And so do you accept that premise? And what should AEW's identity be if in this case where there's the reason for their existence and the reason for their contrast against the big player is no more?
Yeah, I do agree with that premise. I think on sort of both sides, the avoiding not having Vince to go up against anymore and to contrast yourself against, along with, and I would group Punk along with Cody Rhodes as, people that were part of AEW, left for WWE and became key components of WWE's success. Cody more so than Punk. creating the sense that direction had swung in the other way, that rather than having AEW be the place that the stars are looking to jump to, WWE becomes the place that the stars are looking to jump to. And that can affect not only the perception of the company overall, but that can affect the perception of some of the stars. In other words, if you have, if the story is if the perception is, I should say, the perception is that the wrestlers want to be in AEW, which is the perception for a long period of time. Then when someone jumps to AEW, it's like, oh my God, this is so exciting. You got this person that's going there. He's got, or he or she has got ideas of what they're going to do. They've got big plans. And this is another indication this promotion is doing well. If on the other hand, the perception is more, well, people look to go to WWE once they're really looking to get things heated up again or looking to make it back to that top level. Then when someone signs with AEW, it's like, well, there must have been some reason. It's like, well, I guess they weren't cutting it in WWE, or they didn't have good options. They weren't made a good offer. It becomes less exciting than it would be if the perception was that the momentum was falling the other way. So that can affect the excitement of different signings and the perception of the company overall. Then the point you bring up with Vince McMahon, in terms of being able to compete against him, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can sort of create this, you're going against this negative company, then just not being the negative company is a great thing. And that goes back to what I mentioned a while ago, which is you want to have a positive identity of who you are that is different than what the other company is doing. Because WWE can always just be, the top company. That's their identity. We're WWE. We're number one in pro wrestling. Whatever we do just becomes associated with what pro wrestling is. If you want to be an alternative to that, you need to have some sort of a distinct identity. In Japan, there have been lots of promotions that have been very successful over the years, but almost all of them have a different identity than what the number one company is. If you look back and, when Japanese wrestling was very popular in the 1990s, New Japan was the number one company overall. They had the biggest stars, they had the biggest production, the Tokyo Dome shows at a greater rate than other things. All Japan, though, was thriving because All Japan, their thing was the work rate. We've got these young guys, we've got Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi. You get the best action in All Japan. You get clean finishes, not a lot of nonsense. This is the promotion for real wrestling fans. You've got UWFI with Takada. We're real, shoot fighting, not these, nonsense people over here. We got the real tough guys like Takada and Yoji Anjo and, the other guys who can really fight as opposed to the other guys. You've got, Atsushi Onita. He's got the death match stuff and he can draw really big, for stadium shows with that based on his charisma and based on being able to have these, these death matches that the other promotions are not doing. And that, if you're not able to say we're the alternative of big bad number one player, and at that point there wasn't a lot of resentment, as I understand it. I mean, maybe there was, to some Japanese people like New Japan, we hate New Japan, but I don't recall a lot of people that really hated New Japan. But it was just they happened to be number one, and a lot of other people had their own identities. You could get into whichever one you like the best, but in contrast here, if your thing is just we're the place for people that don't like Vince McMahon wrestling, then yeah, once Vince McMahon is gone, it becomes a lot harder.
Maybe what you're trying to say is that in order to kind of present that more realism factor, maybe that does give some guidance into the recent meeting that Tony Khan had with Henzo Gracie trained Shane McMahon.
Yeah, I mean Shane. I mean he's different. He's exciting. He's a tough guy. I mean maybe Shane
the Takada of this generation potentially.
I mean you're not the first person that said that, but it comes up frequently.
Well, that was to be determined the fate of one Shane McMahon. Is there anything else you want to touch on, Brandon, regarding AEW? Because I did want to ask Todd a bit about the everyone's favorite topic, the UFC antitrust lawsuit.
We can get to the legal matters now.
So we do have a trial date, Todd. You and I can be we can be booking our travel for February the 3rd, 2000.
I don't know if you want to book your travel for that one, John.
Okay, well, what are your thoughts that we have a courtroom that is occupied on February 3rd, 2025 with Eric Kramer and company on the plaintiff side against the UFC in this antitrust lawsuit, and how, from your expertise, Todd, like how bizarre is this story that this thing has been resuscitated by Richard Bulware at the last possible minute, where it was thought that this was done and a problem of the TKO's past with this $335 million settlement.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been even weirder if we didn't have sort of these advance notices where Bowler was sort of tipping his hand that he was thinking this way. But yeah, I mean, it's been it's been a real high stakes game of I don't know if chicken's the right word for it, but I mean, there are a lot of people here that have, very strong vested interests. The stakes are very high, and you could have a whole bunch of different outcomes depending upon how these people play this thing out. From the standpoint of the plaintiffs, there's not necessarily like money, life altering money in the sense that you can retire for the rest of your life based on this, but like people, a whole bunch of fighters can pay for a child's education, even with higher education being as expensive as it is, really have a real measurable effect on on their lives moving forward if they get a settlement like this or a settlement more. And from UFC's side, if they got the worst type of judgment against them, they could be looking at money that would significantly alter the way that they would have to do business. And so they got that, they got the settlement that was not going to do that. The stock market was pleased with the amount that they were paying out. And, they thought, okay, we got this thing taken care of. And yeah, Boulware was not, not having it. And I'm not sure what the mentality was on his part, in the sense that, I mean, part of it's obvious. He thought that, the money wasn't enough. This is a guy that, went to Harvard and went to Columbia and then worked for years and years as a public defender. You don't do that if you're not if your mind isn't on the thoughts of the person doesn't have the system is stacked against them, and they're the underdog, and and they need help, because that's not an easy job. And I'm sure he did this on thinking that this was going to be in the best interest of these fighters. But what I was saying in terms of not knowing what his mentality was, I'm not sure if his thought is, this thing needs to go to trial because this should be set, a jury is going to rule much more money is owed to these fighters, or if his thought process was, this money isn't enough and they're not going to up the offer without something like this, a jar saying, I'm not going to accept this offer. And so this is going to get them back at the negotiating table with a higher amount in the end. I'm not sure what he's thinking in that regard, but it's an open question what will happen, whether the parties are able to agree to a figure that's significantly higher that he'll then sign off on, and they can avoid the trial, or if we're going to get this trial. And it's a trial where, man, the stakes are high in this one for, for the entire sport. And yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people involved in this thing that are really biting their nails and nervous about how this thing's going to go. If I had to bet, I think I would bet on them coming up with a higher settlement and getting it signed off on. But I am by no means confident on that front, and it's going to be very interesting to follow. You sort of said jokingly that the antitrust thing. So I take it there are people that are tired of hearing about it. But man, I think it's a fascinating story, and we'll see how it concludes.
Well, it's also, it's one thing for us to discuss like kind of the financial reality for such a massive percentage of fighters, but like, do you get the sense in your circles, Todd, as well, that like the whole like financial discrepancy has permeated into just average fans' understanding of how this works? I mean, it's a small thing, but the fact that like it was a go-to joke for Andrew Schultz on the Tom Brady roast. It's almost as though like the public now does view the UFC as this ultra wealthy, successful company, and a great amount of the fighters are underpaid. Do you feel that can be communicated to a jury, or do you feel like that is going to be a struggle to be able to make the fighters' case to a jury where they do need a unanimous verdict to be rendered?
Well, not necessarily. The parties can actually agree if they want on less than a unanimous verdict on a civil trial at the federal level. Now, I don't know that the parties would agree on that, but that hasn't been decided one way or another.
Okay.
As far as the getting across that and by the way, just to be clear, I would expect it's like, if it comes to that, that's likely what they would be there, but it doesn't have to be that way. As far as the getting across to people, the pay scale, that part I think is going to be easy to get across to the average person. You just show the figures. This is how much the UFC is making. This is how much the fighters are making. And this, we're not talking about like now where like the fighters, I mean, granted, like it's not like they're being paid extravagant amounts like the average fighter now, but like, you look at the when they get at the fighter scales, you'll be looking at people making in the, the 40,000, 50,000 range, for the most part, or higher, up to the hundreds of thousands for a fight. Whereas back then, I mean, it was sort of a comical thing. I mean, I don't know if you want to laugh at it, but I mean, like, where you could see, $6,000, $8,000, $4,000 to show, on shows that were doing, lots and lots of money as late as, 2007, 2008. And I think it's very easy, to show, hey, this is how much UFC is making. This is how much the fighters are making. And look at the other sports where these fighters, where the basketball players, or baseball players, or football players, or hockey players are making so much more. I think it's easy to communicate to the average juror that doesn't seem right. Now, where the issues come in is then convincing them, number one, that the past actions that the UFC took were anti-competitive in nature, such as buying their competition, and proving that those tactics were anti-competitive in nature, and then also proving that the specific moves that they made, which you have to prove they're anti-competitive, also resulted in the discrepancy in the pay. And that's not as clear. It's not as clear if UFC hadn't bought Pride and hadn't bought Strikeforce, that fighters would be making a lot more money. Because money went up over time, even as the sport became less, there were a less number of competitors and became more concentrated in terms of UFC. So I think it's entirely possible there are going to be jurors there that would look at this and say, yes, these fighters, I feel like these fighters probably should have been paid more. I think that's the easier part. The harder part is the government, proving its case that, the government, sorry, this is not the government here, that the fighters are proving their case that the UFC's specific measures were anti-competitive and that they led to the fighters' pay being, the discrepancy that it was. And that's a lot trickier argument to make, and a lot less clear. Now, I think what the fighters would hope for, and I think what the judge was thinking, was the jurors are going to be so struck by that discrepancy that's just going to guide everything. And that's possible, but that raises another issue, which is that frequently in these sorts of things, and the American judicial system, for better or worse, has sort of mitigated against this with time. I think probably actually for worse, in the sense that, like, you've seen a trend over the last few decades where appellate courts are much more likely to strike down really high juror awards in cases where they're very sympathetic towards the plaintiff, but the appellate courts say the way they're thinking about this case isn't consistent with the facts. And that's something that the plaintiff's attorneys brought up, is that, hey, even if we get jurors that are very sympathetic towards our case, we may take it to appellate court, may take it to the Supreme Court, and they say, hey, either the figures that you've held up are too high for the amount here, or the nature of the actions that the UFC took can't be established as anti-competitive in nature, and thus there shouldn't have been a award in the first place. And thus, even if you got the big jury award, you might potentially get it struck down on appeal, which is something that happens very commonly in cases of that nature. Now, this is a very specific case, but in terms of cases where you've got a jury that's very sympathetic towards workers and their position relative to a more powerful company.
Is there, other than the fact that UFC and WWE are sharing finances, is there any reason why, if you're WWE or even AEW watching this, that you should be a little nervous about precedents that might be set?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely, it's something to be concerned about, because the companies are similar in nature. I would not take it as any sort of a given, though, that one would necessarily lead towards the others, for a variety of reasons. I mean, one, when you talk about the actions by UFC that are taken to be anti-competitive, those are in a much more recent time frame. Whereas a lot of the stuff that you can point to with WWE, in terms of anti-competitive natures, are things from long in the past. In terms of the strongest stuff, in terms of shutting down competition or whatnot. In recent years, you can point to little things here and there in terms of dirty tricks they've used with competition. But in terms of like,
I heard they're running a house show head to head with World's End in Orlando.
I heard that was entirely coincidental.
Yes.
I mean, I go imagine, but yeah, I heard they didn't even know that there was another show in town. So I mean, I think that there's less less grounding in terms of recent actions there, and it's also, I think, harder to point to the fighter pay, in the sense that a big part, as we were talking about just a second ago, John, of the UFC case and why it would be potentially strong, is that you've got a bunch of these fighters who are making really small amounts of money. Years back, there would be people that would they would fight 3 times in a year, and they might get $30,000 for those 3 fights, and go to the gym expenses, put everything else in. It looks absolutely ridiculous.
It's crazy.
Whereas WWE, like that hasn't been the case with WWE. Like, yeah, some of their developmental people might make a little bit less, but in terms of like the people, if you're on the main roster, like even now you're making a lot of money, but even a few years back, I mean, there aren't a lot of main roster people that aren't getting 6-figure contracts, and so you don't have that same discrepancy where you can say, really hammer, like, look at how little these are getting paid. You can point at like the percentages, and that still stands out, like, oh, they're only getting this percentage of the pay, and the hockey players are getting this percentage of the pay. But I mean, I think the average juror might say, well, they're not entitled to a certain amount of pay, and hey, they're getting plenty of money. And then there's another factor. Sorry, I keep going on here, but another factor in terms of the distinction between the two is that a lot of these fighters were happy to join in these lawsuits, because at the point that they're released by UFC, they're in their mid to late 30s. They're not going to be back in the UFC. So like, they're happy to join on in large numbers, which makes a lawsuit easier to file as a class action and makes it easier to litigate. Whereas with WWE, we've seen this lots of times when it comes to wrestlers banding together. Every wrestler thinks, hey, maybe I'll have one last run, even if you're 52 years old, because it's pro wrestling. You can have a last run, and you like the idea of getting your figures from merch deals. You like the idea of being entered into the Hall of Fame or being featured in the video game. A lot of those older wrestlers are going to be a lot less inclined to get involved in that sort of thing than older fighters are, which in turn also makes it harder to do. So yes, absolutely, I think WWE is looking on in interest, but I don't think that the two translate as neatly as is sometimes asserted.
The last thing on this is that, just again, in the event it goes to a trial, there's some gigantic figure, and you would assume the potential of an appeal. Like, is it hyperbole to think like this could be years before these fighters see this money, versus like they're right at the finish line with this settlement that they could see real money in the next year?
I mean, it depends what happens. I mean, if there was a big figure that was decided by a jury as opposed to by a second settlement, then yeah, UFC is definitely going to be appealing that. It's going to go through litigation for a long period of time, and yeah, I don't see a scenario. I'm sort of thinking, like, is there a possibility that they would see the money for some reason in the short term, medium term? And no, I don't see that happening. I think that if you got a big figure, then yeah, you'd have to wait a while for it. But I mean, if that's the case, I mean, I think a lot of those fighters would say, like, yeah, I'll trade off having to wait 3 years if it means I get 5 times as much. But there's no guarantee they're gonna get 5 times as much. And then there's, as mentioned, the possibility of an appellate court just striking down the thing altogether, which is a frightening possibility if you're the plaintiffs or the plaintiffs' attorneys.
Well, you can catch Todd Martin with Wade Keller every Thursday evening on the VIP portion of the at pwtorch.com, a highly recommended listen for everyone out there. Are there any books on the in the forthcoming review panel for you, Todd, that are coming up?
Yeah, actually, there are 2 that I've finished that are coming up. This week, I'm going to be reviewing the second Steve Kern book, which was released earlier this year. Have you guys read that? I feel like I talked with you about one of you about reading that.
I have not, John. I have not read the Steve Kern book. I'm
just misremembering that. I was talking with someone else about it. I feel like on WrestleMania weekend when I saw you guys,
we talked about the Rousey book, which I know you did get to finally read. I think it lived up to my.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that as well. I was definitely talking with someone about the Steve Kern book that weekend, but it was not you guys. Anyway, it's another very interesting book, and I loved his first book, and the second one is also very engaging. So I'm looking forward to talking about that with Wade tomorrow, and I've also got the Steve Johnson Jim Londos book read, and that's coming up though when the book's released, because the book hasn't been released yet, so that's like another month or so. But I read it and taken down my notes, and that's another excellent book. So I feel like I've been getting spoiled. I've been liking most of the wrestling books that I've been reading for quite some time, although it may be a little bit of selection bias, because there are a couple of books that I grabbed that I'm not expecting to be very good, that I've been sort of holding off on reading. So I would expect I probably am not going to like those as much when I get to them.
Yeah. Before we go ahead, John.
Nothing. I was just going to say it's always nice once in a while to get one of those bottom tier books. I think there's a certain charm to your Hulk Hogan release of such, or a some of the others that reach Todd's bottom tier.
Yes, I enjoy burying a book too. Bruce Buffer's was a fun book to read.
Memorably, yes.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Before we let Todd go, I just wanted to get your reaction to a comment that John Cena, you as a big John Cena respecter and all of his ethos, I just wanted to hear your reaction to this clip from a John Cena interview that came out, I believe, today with Shannon Sharp.
I have such a trustworthy relationship with them over 2 decades. Correct. I am a champion of the brand. I love the company. It is my home. They are my family. Even after 2025, I've already signed an extension to remain a member of the WWE family for the near, mid, and long-term future. Gotcha. I don't think there'll be a beat of my heart where WWE blood doesn't come out of. Mm-hmm.
WWE blood. I wonder if they could bottle that for the farewell tour. I mean, WWE blood is pumped by the plasma of John Cena.
Yeah, for forever, like Terry Funk once yelled. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that once he, this likely isn't gonna be the case, but I'm hoping once he's not promoting his own individual matches, that he may tone down a little bit of the sort of the cheese factor in terms of the way he hypes things. But yeah, I mean, he's been a great ambassador for them, and has been very successful through them as well. It hasn't always been my favorite, type of wrestling, nor has it resulted in the popularity of the product moving up for the most part. But he's done very well in that ecosystem, and even better than you'd expect outside of that ecosystem, where he's been having a tremendous run in the movies, much more so than I would have expected. So yeah, he's been a real success in that regard.
Yeah, there's a particular personality to John Cena that I find fascinating. He also says in this interview that he on his day off recently, he took like a 14-hour drive around the circumference or the perimeter of Florida, and he listened to no music. He only listened to the sound of the car. I was recently asked if I could pick one wrestler that I would trust to pick me up at the airport. Who would it be? And I said, "Oh, John Cena, of course."
Appreciate the courage.
That is a great story, and a bizarre story. I don't know what to make of that. Driving around the perimeter of Florida, just doing nothing. Just
as soon as I heard that story, I remembered that episode of, I believe it was Total Bellas, and the remark about his lack of wall art. Like, he just lived in this house that was like these empty walls. It was the exact house you would imagine John Cena to occupy. And yeah, I don't for a second doubt that he went on a 800-mile ride just in his own thoughts. It's probably very, very cathartic.
Yeah, I need a John Cena reality show just for him and his daily life.
I'll say this, John. I actually do doubt it. Like, I mean, yes, he's weird enough that it seems possible, but I'm still a little suspicious of that. Like, really, you didn't listen to any music that entire time. You didn't pop in a podcast. You just sat there and listened to the car. I'm a little skeptical.
Look at these walls, Todd. If you can see these, I mean, this is John Cena, the man who had his own rules for everyone living inside of his home. An interesting individual to say the least, but yes, pumping that WWE blood straight from his heart to Stamford, Connecticut. But we appreciate you, Todd, pumping some life here into the Pollock and Thurston show. Joining us as always. It's always great to catch up with you and follow along all of Todd's great work on The Fix. I would plug his Twitter, but the man has the best approach to Twitter in 2024, where he only retweets when he shows up on our show. I've noticed. So that's the best way to handle your social media in this day and age, Todd.
Certainly.
Yes. Nothing but retweets from Post Wrestling. If Wade tagged me in things from the Torch, I would also retweet it. But he doesn't tag me, so I don't retweet it. So yeah.
I noticed Wade doesn't use Twitter much anymore either, other than to retweet political stuff, I think.
Yes, he does. He does a fair amount of that.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Tonight, I mean, Dynamite, a taped episode going head to head with Bill Clinton, with Tim Walz, with Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they've got head to head competition tonight.
Yeah, although I bet they're happy that's still better than the Obamas or the Harris speech tomorrow. So they got a little lucky, but yeah, I don't think that's going to help them in their go home show before All In.
Bryan Danielson needs a Michelle Obama go home promo tonight.
That was something.
Do
else.
something.
I've heard a lot of Michelle Obama speeches over the years, and she's a great speaker in her own right. But I don't think I'd ever thought like Michelle Obama topped Barack Obama, and I thought last night she pulled that off. So that's an accomplishment.
I'm a Canadian. I was ready to vote for Michelle as my write-in candidate after watching that last night. It was quite the speech. Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely do this again sometime soon when you're willing to put up with us for another half hour.
Oh, it's fun. Sounds good, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Todd.
All right. The great Todd Martin, everybody, joining us here on the show. And yes, we got to hear a bit of John Cena there as well and his 8-hour drive. I've not listened to this whole podcast.
It's more than 8 hours. He said he left at like 5 a.m. and he got home at like 10 p.m.
Yeah, it was like 800 and some odd miles that he drove.
He said he turned the phone off and he put it in the back seat.
I wonder what kind of car you're going. Like, is he going for like some like?
I'm sure it was a really fancy
one of his
car.
Vintage cars. I'm sure he has a nice car.
There was car discussion on this podcast too.
Okay, well, there you have it. Shannon Sharp getting the sit down with one John Cena. Before we wrap things up, let's just go through some other news. I want to get your thoughts, Brandon. Ariel Helwani has announced his next stop. He is leaving Spotify and Vox Media, where he had hosted the MMA Hour, and he is launching his own vertical, essentially, in partnership with Yahoo Sports. And this is going to be called Uncrowned, and he's going to be doing shows throughout the week and he's going to own all of his content, which is interesting. He mentioned that he's been in talks for this for quite a while, but also expanding with a boxing show, a pro wrestling show. They're going to be doing a soft launch in September, and then in the fall, fully launching this. But this is pretty much a leap into all of combat sports that he's going to.
Is he going to be hosting the pro wrestling show?
I don't know if he's going to be hosting it. He's doing his own show Monday to Wednesday. That'll be MMA focused. But I mean, if you've listened to his show, I mean, he has been getting a lot more into boxing coverage. He's done pro wrestling coverage. Not as much over the past year, but has certainly done his pro wrestling interviews on the show that I'm sure those will be woven in. But yeah, no announcement on who will be doing this wrestling show or boxing show for that matter.
Does this make him a pro? I know this was an issue around Montreal Elimination Chamber time. Does this make him a pro wrestling journalist?
At this point, I mean, he's going to be overseeing a pro wrestling show. He's the executive producer of this entire thing. So an interesting move for him. I mean, it's very much following, I think, where a lot of figures are moving towards, where they can control their content and partnering with Yahoo. That seems to be, I mean, this is one of the rare instances of an outlet that is investing in MMA coverage, because more and more you're just seeing a lot of established people that are getting out of coverage of MMA, whether it is Mark Ramundi from ESPN. You had Stephen Morocco, who was a great investigative reporter with MMA Fighting. He had been let go, and you just see a lot of names that have been covering MMA for so long going away, and at least Yahoo is kind of investing in this, and Ariel is going to be the biggest name you can have in MMA coverage.
Yes, so we'll look forward to what he does, and if he's going to cover wrestling, that'll be most interesting for me.
Ratings from this past week. Brandon just reported the Raw numbers, and they were going up against the first night of the Democratic National Convention. Who was speaking on the first night? It was Joe Biden got like the bump.
Biden was the main event, but he went on at like near midnight.
He was pushed out of prime time, yeah. And I think they had.
But Hillary was on.
Hillary was night one.
Yeah, there was a lot. I was telling someone that I think it's in Chicago, so Tony Khan must have booked this lineup here. Yeah, it was a lot of people, including Hillary was probably the biggest name. That's the first one that I'm remembering. But it did the lowest demo and total viewership that it's done since June. But I think you can largely attribute it to the DNC. It did rank number 2 among all telecasts in the demo for the day. It was beaten by the CNN coverage of the DNC.
Yeah, which they were very close to CNN, but of course,
really close.
DNC was, it was covered on multiple networks as well. So like that was the raw audience. Collision had a bit of a bounce back post Olympics with 406,000 viewers and a 0.13. Mainly it was their 18 to 34 audience that kind of returned to normal levels after just plummeting the prior week. They were up to 60,000 on Saturday night, and then we had SmackDown on Friday with 2,252,000 viewers and a 0.61, largely unchanged from the week prior, which was going against the closing ceremonies, I guess, of the Olympics.
And number 1 in the demo across, I think, all of TV for the day on Friday, as it routinely is.
The last thing I wanted to ask you, Brandon, is Phil Donahue passed away this week. Have you sat down? Did you ever watch the full Donahue episode from 1992?
More than once, yes.
You know how I first saw this thing? I was in high school, and I ordered a tape off of eBay that had all of the like TV tabloid shows covering wrestling on one VHS tape, and it contained the Phil Donahue show from 1992. So I got that on a VHS
great comp tape. Wow.
Yeah, that was pre-YouTube. This was the struggle, and it was something else to be just to see this, and the fact that, I mean, it seems even more insane when you hear the stories of how Vince McMahon only agreed at the last minute, and the fact that he had this, like, less surprising today that he had this whole plan orchestrated with Tom Cole in the audience, who he had quietly settled with that weekend, and was ready to do this just elaborate Vince McMahon-like stunt that I try to imagine, like, how that would have been perceived.
His Perry Mason moment, right?
How that would have played to that audience. I think it, like, would they have all just like popped and gone crazy? Like what that scene would have been like. But it's a fascinating hour of television, and I mean the constant was that Phil Donahue, especially for the time period, I thought he really did justice to a story that was very serious, but not taken as seriously by a lot of people in the public at the time.
Yeah, the funny thing about that show is it's happening in the midst of all of these sort of daytime talk show programs doing some sort of coverage, some Geraldo around this time, but they focus only on the sexual harassment, allegedly from Pat Patterson and others. There's Barry Orton talking about the sexual harassment from Terry Garvin, but there's just very little. I think there's like some mentioning in passing of the Ring Boy scandal that didn't get that much attention, and sort of therefore, I mean, if that came up more, that probably would have led to the Perry Mason Tom Cole moment that did not happen.
Yeah, and the story always was that it was like Barry Orton kind of had a sense that something was up because Tom Cole had stopped answering his calls over the weekend, and I guess he reiterated that to members of the panel, and Tom Cole's name never came up, but he was there in the crowd with Miss Elizabeth and Linda McMahon, and was ready for this moment. And it was afterwards that Dave Meltzer shared the story that one of the producers came up to him after the show and saying Tom Cole was in the audience, and they were not aware of it during the show. But it's something, if you've never seen it, it's certainly worth watching just to see the demeanor. And I mean, if you don't know anything about the story, you'll come away with the idea that Murray Hodgson was just this guy that came on and just slayed Vince McMahon, and a guy that would be proven to be not too credible afterwards, although I still find him to be this mysterious figure that just went into the night afterward, and we've never heard from this guy since.
Yes, he has a very memorable line where he ends his big promo with, "I don't buy it." Big eruption in the studio audience.
Vince McMahon, there was a national talent search, and you flew me in 4 times to Stamford, Connecticut. I mean, this guy was on point. I mean, I think he had practiced.
Might have been practicing that in the mirror.
He might have been. He might have been a few times. But there you go. One final super chat. We'll close out the show from Jumanji Hunter. Thank you. This is definitely a question for Brandon. How much do picture-in-picture commercials versus real commercials benefit the network? Also, is there a big difference in the amount of commercials between WWE and AEW?
This is a question that if I had 15 minutes to pull up in my spreadsheets, I could give you a more substantive answer to, but I'll try to do my best. Do they benefit the network differently? I don't know for sure. So I can tell you about viewership. They maintain the viewership, I think, a little bit better. And if I could look at some minute-by-minute data, the few examples that we have that are public, I think you would see that. It does help retain. It's still, the viewers still tune out, but not to the degree when there's full-screen ads. And is there a big difference between the amount of commercials between W and AEW? I don't think so. I think there's a similar amount of ad time on just about any TV show. On my quarter-hour reports, which are free for everybody after 7 days, you can look at them. There's some new ones that have been updated to the website just now. You can see the sort of the ad count, and I think it's for Raw. I think it's like there's 15 ad breaks in Raw. There's about 9 or 10 for a 2-hour program, and it's pretty consistent across WWE and AEW. And I have asked the question. I think Chris Harrington and I did a podcast a few years ago now where we went through. This is while he's working for AEW by then, and we went through some viewership data. And I remember asking him. Maybe it was on another interview we did. I remember asking him is it valued differently? Like, are you paying, since you're sharing the screen with the content, are you paying less for the ad? He gave me a non-direct answer to that. So I don't know.
There you go. Well, thank you for the super chats, everyone. Want to thank Todd Martin for stopping by, and that will bring an end to the show. But Brandon will be back this coming weekend. Should I say weekend? What is it's another pay-per-view weekend for you. I guess you're not going to go.
You're always breaking this news to me.
Yeah, I'm just, do you realize actually that AEW is doing a 2-hour pre-show, which means the pre-show begins at 11 a.m. on Sunday. So you would be going directly against the pre-show of All In if you went on Sunday.
Well, no, I can't then, because All In will be so. I mean, the attendance, if nothing else, it'll be instantly stale if I do it.
Do picture-in-picture with Wrestlenomics and the All In.
Yeah, we'll do a watch-along, maybe, no. So probably Monday for subscribers only.
All right. Well, you can check out that patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. Tonight, Wayne and I will be up after the tape-delayed edition of Dynamite from Cardiff, Wales, which we are going head-to-head with at the moment, although none of you are watching.
Do we have spoilers? Do we have spoilers right now for Dynamite?
We probably will have spoilers. I know that Michael Oku worked a dark match. That's all I know of today's show in Cardiff. But yes, we will be up tonight, 10:05 Eastern on the Post Wrestling YouTube channel, and then a Rewind Away coming out on Thursday, looking back at WrestleMania 10 from March of 1994. So that is going to be something as well. So check out all of that and keep things tuned to postwrestling.com and Wrestlenomics.com. We'll speak with you next Wednesday, same time here on both channels. Goodbye. Have a great week.